rebuilding your brain from the bottom up. The building blocks that need to be in place to reclaim your brain after a stroke or a brain injury.
This is the Brain Rehab channel, where we show stroke survivors and those with a brain injury how to continue to improve. We are out-of-the-box thinkers and bending the rules of rehab. Linda, stroke survivor, biohacker, and best-selling author of Stroke Rebel. Arjun, functional neurologist and expert brain trainer. We are brain.rehab.
Hi, welcome to the second video in the mini masterclass series about retraining or reclaiming your brain after a stroke or brain injury such as a concussion. If you have not seen the first video in this series about building the best basis where we specifically address what you can do with stress, please go and watch that video before watching this video. In this video you will learn which building blocks need to be in place next to having the best basis, so you can go further in your recovery efforts of reclaiming or rebuilding your brain after a stroke or brain injury. You will learn at the end that there are specific things you have not learned in regular rehabilitation that you can do to go further in your rehabilitation efforts. Or when you do those alongside of what you're already doing, that you will have more success and go further in reclaiming your brain and rebuilding your brain. How does the brain normally build itself? Well, you are born with a lot of nerve cells. They are not organized, and there are some specific movements that are already in place when you are born. Later in the video I will explain that movement of the body and brain activity, they are the same, they are linked. So moving your body means moving your brain, bringing your brain into activity. So the movement of the body and building the brain to a more complex system that takes over more and more control goes hand in hand. What are the building blocks to reach optimal control from your brain? Well, we know when you're an adult and your brain has matured, after your mid-20s, actually early 30s, the frontal parts actually can develop until your early 30s, that you need to go through some stages, building blocks, so to speak. In the last episode we already said there need to be some basic requirements like oxygen, fuel, activation. You have to have the right energy, you have to decrease stress, you have to drink water, expose yourself to light. There's some other elements like avoiding toxins in your environment, not just stress toxins, stressful, toxic people in your environment. And there's some genetics that have some influence, but not as much as we always thought. It's those environmental factors that we talked about in the last video, avoiding the toxins and stress in your life, that are way more important. So you're born with a set of primitive movements that starts the connection, building your nervous system. These are so-called primitive movements, also called primitive reflexes. In addition to that, and that is going to be very important and I'm going to show you why it is important when you're dealing, for example, with a stroke, but also with a traumatic brain injury. You have inbuilt cross-scroll patterns. You have patterns built into your spinal cord that has basic movement patterns of your arms and your legs, so they can move in synchronicity when you're upright and walking. And when your brain and nervous system are building, we see that the refinement of your postural, of your movements, think of a child or a baby that is moving, and to a gracious adult that has really trained his body to move in an optimal state or do sports in an optimal way, is that we get more and more control once we build the brain. We start with primitive movements and the inbuilt cross-scroll patterns in your spinal cord. very importantly, when we lose optimal control from the brain after a stroke or a brain injury, like a concussion, we see that we regress back to less refined movement patterns, and we see some of the elements of those primitive movement patterns or disturbed cross-crawl patterns, less refinement in the cross-crawl patterns, we see that back in how people move. We know that keeping yourself upright, keeping your posture upright, walking, keeping your balance is one of the first things that goes wrong when you analyze it, when someone's brain suffers a brain injury. So that's very important to remember. Now, when we start moving in more refined ways, we lose these primitive movement patterns, we optimize our cross-crawl patterns, we optimize the stability. The next building block is we get more and more stable and more strength, so we can prop ourselves up and finally sit up and start walking and move in an upright position. We need very strong postural core strength and stability around the shoulders and the hips to have optimal control over our arms and our legs. So that is a very important building block that comes on top of the primitive movements. Now, and this is an example. My business partner, Linda, she suffered a massive stroke in 2016. She was not going to walk or talk again or use her left arm. She was completely paralyzed on her left side and spastic. The first time when I met her, she was walking around with her arm in a fixed position. So when she was walking around, and you will see that in the video that shows next to what I'm saying, is that she was holding her arm in a fixed position and her leg was circumducting. By activating the building block where we activate the cross-crawl patterns and we inhibit the primitive movement patterns that reappeared after her stroke, she got rid of a big part of her spasticity and she loosened up her arm while walking and got much better leg control, as you can see in the video, by practicing cross-crawl and pre-crawling exercises that got rid of the more primitive movements that she had developed. This is a very primitive movement, like babies have movement that are really not controlled and look very spasmodic and random. She got more purposeful movement back by addressing the basic movement patterns, the basic cross-crawl patterns that are already there but lost refinement because of the stroke. It is very important that that is where you start, not only to rebuild movement but also to reclaim your brain, because you can see the build-up of optimal brain control as a pyramid. We have talked about the basic building blocks. The next block that develops is balance control. And balance control is really the master block in that builds the pyramid, because balance, vestibular integration with a very fancy word, basically connects the outside world with your inside world. It makes sure that you have perfect orientation in space, in relation to others, in relation to yourself, and so you know where to place your body parts, how to relate to other people, and if that is developing in a good way because the primitive movements disappear, you get optimal core strength and postural control, which drives basic brain function and optimizes brain recovery, then everything is optimal. And the balance system is the key, because balance system is very vulnerable. And why is that? The balance system is not just made up of the inner ear balance system, the vestibular system, the vestibular apparatus with a fancy word. No, it's much more than that. It's all the movement information, the proprioceptive perception of the rest of your body, of the movements of your body, the sensors that sense when you are moving and what direction, which is the inner ear, the balance system. It's your eye information, it's your ear information, but it is also smell, taste. It is your thinking parts, your frontal lobes, it's the occipital lobes where you sense vision, the parietal lobes where you make sense of all the information from the outside world, and also your memory part. So it is really big. It's connecting everything with everything. And when that gets disrupted, and it is a very vulnerable system, through a stroke or a brain injury, a knock to the head for example, we see that you cannot function optimally. So we need that building block to be able to relate to the outside world, to rebuild purposeful movement, but also to feel centered and grounded. So that is the master building block. And on top of that, we build the integration of visual information, hearing, smell, of touch, where the body parts are in place, and then we develop our optimal cognitive control. So when you're dealing with a stroke, this is a fact, but also when you're dealing with traumatic brain injury, where we see that the cognition is often affected, it is the networks of the balance system that are the most vulnerable. If that is fine-tuned again by training your balance, by readdressing where you are in space, by training the basic building blocks so the balance system can develop properly, we see that you have a much better chance of recovering further than you have done so far. And this is most often overlooked part. The balance system, when that's off, like the visual system, you don't notice it necessarily that you have visual problems or that you have balance issues, but you might notice it that your brain is not functioning properly, or that you trip more easily, or that you cannot relearn movement, or that you have more difficult reclaiming speech. Another example, Linda was greatly helped in her speech efforts, relearning to speak, by doing balance exercises. Balance drives the brain like the postural system and is one of the vital components for basic brain activity and putting your brain in a higher operation mode. So, what you can do right now is to start paying attention to all these building blocks, starting with building the proper movements, cross-crawl movements that you can see in other videos that we have made, building the postural system, start to address posture and breathing to build higher function in the brain. In the next video, we're going to talk about a very specific protocol that you can do to maximize repair of brain injuries. Proven protocols, there will be some surprises in there, and at the end we have an announcement where you can learn even more about all of these topics. If you have comments, please give them below. Make sure you check your inbox for the announcement of the next videos. Also check your spam box if you have not already done so. Some of our mails unfortunately end up there. Whitelist our emails with your email provider, and we see you in the next training.
Our Brain.Rehab portal is a continuous improvement training platform for the home situation. It contains the best training, masterclasses, latest news, and interviews on topics that will keep you improving in the years to come. Check out what it can do for you and become a member of the Brain.Rehab tribe. www.brain.rehab